1893, he came to St. Petersburg to help organize a socialist workers' party. He arrived at a fateful time. Tsar Alexander III was near the end of his reign. 13 years of political repression and economic expansion. The following year, Alexander died and left the crown to his 26-year-old son, Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov. From childhood, Nicholas showed little interest in government or initiative to rule. Neither his reactionary father nor his conservative tutors prepared the Tsarevich to grapple with the changing realities of a modern industrial world.
I think that Nicholas II felt himself completely unprepared to be Tsar. He got a lot of positive reinforcement with that idea because people around him also believed that he was unprepared to be Tsar.
Dreading the overwhelming burdens of leading the world's largest empire, Nicholas reached out for his soulmate, the young German princess Alix Victoria Helena Louise of Hesse. Although she was the grandchild of England's Queen Victoria, the future Tsarina was no better suited for the burdens of rule than her husband.
She was so shy that she would sit there and just tear at her gloves. Public appearances were agony for her. She wanted seclusion, and the Russians interpreted that as a disinterest in the plight of the Russians. She was just seen as an arrogant, uncaring German.
With the nation officially still in mourning for Alexander III, Nicholas rushed into marriage. His German bride took the Russian name Alexandra. People muttered that the new Tsarina had arrived behind a coffin. Nicholas was crowned in the Kremlin amid splendor meant to bond the Tsar with his people. Instead, the opulence only underscored the divide between Nicholas and his subjects. After more than 30 years of forced industrialization, Russia's working poor were as poor as ever. Factories, mines, and farms became breeding grounds for unrest. Radicals like the young Lenin fed the discontent. They spread Marxist propaganda and organized revolutionary cells. In 1895, the Tsar's police struck back. Lenin was arrested, convicted, and shipped off to Siberia. After his release, Lenin fled Russia for the West. But even in foreign exile, his radical ideas would continue to fan the flames of revolution. But the Tsar, Nicholas, remained oblivious to his subjects' suffering and their growing will to take action. Instead, his boldest step as Russia's supreme commander would only fuel the rising fire. On the Pacific Rim, Nicholas sought to seize new territories from China and Korea. His grandiose imperial ambitions collided with another growing empire, Japan. Alarmed by Russian advances, in 1904, the Empire of the Rising Sun declared war. The recently completed Trans-Siberian Railway enabled the Tsar to pour troops into the conflict. But machine guns and aggressive Japanese tactics sent Russia's death tolls soaring. To back up his forces, Nicholas assembled a naval armada in the Baltic, 300 ships, and ordered them to sail for the Sea of Japan, an odyssey of 21,000 miles. In May 1905, after 8 grueling months of hunger, mutiny, and disease, the Russian ships finally reached the Pacific coast, where the Japanese lay in wait. With faster ships and better guns, in a single battle, the Japanese sank 2/3 of the Russian fleet. The pride of Russia, the navy Peter the Great had founded, was all but obliterated.
The war itself was not necessary. It was a terrible waste of Russia's resources. And of course, on top of that, Russia was defeated, which was a catastrophe, both for the legitimacy of the regime and for the emperor's own prestige in the eyes of his ministers, his senior officials, and indeed of the educated public.
In St. Petersburg, news of the naval disaster would reach a city already in open revolt. 1905 would be a year of revolution. the Tsar's ancient right to divine, absolute rule was about to collide with the will of the Russian people. In August of 1904, Nicholas and Alexandra Romanov celebrated the birth of their 5th child. After 10 years and 4 girls, at last an heir to the throne, a Tsarevich, Alexei. To be born into the Russian royal family in the 20th century was to be blessed and cursed. Blessed with a life of privilege and luxury, and cursed by history. Nicholas and Alexandra had realized their personal dream, a close and loving family. But from infancy, the Tsarevich Alexei was not well. Doctors soon confirmed the worst. The baby had hemophilia, the bleeding disease. No treatment existed. Most victims of hemophilia died in childhood. Alexei's disease was the Romanov family's curse. If the royal heir died, the empire would be rocked by a succession crisis, at a time when the Tsar's prestige was faltering.
Alexei's hemophilia is a secret of state. Because he's the heir, no one can talk about it. His health in general is not discussed at all.
But in the streets of Russia's cities, the Romanov dynasty was already under attack as sick and out of touch. Fall of 1904 brought soaring inflation. Winter brought hunger and hardship. News of the disastrous string of defeats in the war with Japan shook public faith in the Tsar's leadership. On Sunday, January 9th, 1905, a vast throng of protesters marched on the Winter Palace. Workers, students, priests. Led by Orthodox priest Georgy Gapon, the marchers carried a petition signed by over 100,000. They asked the Tsar for representative government, freedom of speech, workers' rights, and peace with Japan.
This is a nonviolent demonstration. It's also non-political. The workers are not carrying banners with revolutionary slogans. Rather, they're carrying icons, and they're making it very clear that they're deeply religious, faithful people who love the Tsar, who are simply trying to tell the Tsar of their plight and to ask the Tsar to help them out.
The marchers refused to leave without delivering their petition to the Tsar. But Nicholas was out of town with his family. The palace guard's response was swift and brutal. Father Georgy Gapon.
A cry of alarm arose as the guards came down upon us. I saw the swords lifted and falling. The men, women, and children dropping to the earth like logs of wood, while moans, curses, and shouts filled the air.
The palace claimed fewer than 100 had died. Marchers put the death toll at 1,000. Whatever the truth, the debacle, Bloody Sunday, ignited a wave of rebellion.
The impact of Bloody Sunday is that it shatters forever this myth that the Tsar doesn't know that the Russian people are suffering.
By summer, uprisings had crippled factories and farms across Russia. Revolutionary councils grabbed for power in 50 cities. Armed workers threatened to destroy any factory that stayed open. Facing open civil war, Tsar Nicholas, defender of the dynasty, weighed his options.
To crush the rebellion by sheer force, that would mean rivers of blood. The other way out would be to give the people their civil rights, to have laws confirmed by a state Duma. That, of course, would be a constitution.
In October 1905, the Tsar bowed to reality. His October Manifesto granted basic civil